Hello, seventh graders. Good to have you here. We're going to pick up on page 173, bottom of 173. I may start at the top of 173 because Johnny's starting to realize some things. In what we read earlier this week, we saw that Scylla and Isana are now living with the Lights, with Lavinia Light, because Lavinia loves the beauty of Isana, and Scylla's gone with her. We see how Dove has actually become a stable boy for the British, but he's picked on by those kids. And Johnny is finding himself less angry at Dove, even though he doesn't really like Dove. It's kind of weird how that's changed for him. And page 173 is really a reflective time when he sees, and the British wanted to buy Goblin because he's such a beautiful horse, but the guy who wrote it for the admiral or whatever his name was, the colonel, got thrown off at the very end and kind of laughed about it and realized why Johnny wouldn't want to get rid of him and didn't push it. And then Johnny's also been told he does need to maintain the friendship with Dove because as a stable boy with the British, they will get some input. They may get a heads up if the British are actually going to start moving. So I'm going to start at the top of 173, even though we've read most of this. As he came back from Milton, riding the long, lonely stretch of the Neck, with the gallows and the town gates still before him, Johnny realized how long it was that he had burned his, how long ago it was that he had burned his hand, and how he'd hated Dove when he found out the part he'd played in the accident. How he had sworn to get even with him, the lying hypocrite, telling old Mr. Lapham that all he had meant to do was teach a pious lesson. Now, as he saw Dove daily about the Afric queen, he could hardly remember this feeling of hatred, his oaths of vengeance. Seemingly, hatred and desire for revenge do not last long. He had made new friends. The old world of the Lapham shop and house was gone. Yet he remembered old Mr. Lapham, who had died that spring, with more affection than had been than when he had been serving under him. Even Mrs. Lapham now did not seem so bad. Poor woman, how she'd struggled and worked for that good, plentiful food, the clean shirts her boys had worn, the scrubbed floors, polished brass. No, she'd never been the ogress he'd thought her a year ago. There never had been a single day when she'd not been up first in the morning. He, like a child, had thought that was because she liked to get up. Now he realized that there must have been many a day when she was as anxious to lie abed as Dove himself. He remembered when there was no money to buy meat, and how she would go from stall to stall until she found a butcher who would accept payment by a new clasp on his pocketbook, or a fishwife who would exchange a basket of salt herring for a black mourning ring. Her bartering and bickering had all seemed small-minded to him. Now he was enough older to realize how valiantly she had fought for those under her care. This really represents a growth in Johnny's maturity. He's beginning to see things from a much broader perspective and to judge people less. And I think Rab has a lot to do with this because he sees in Rab a strength, and Rab's the first one that said, why do you go after people the way you do? And Johnny's starting to see things in a new way. All right, bottom of 173. True, imagine making another of those big-fisted, hardy women, but women can be worse than that. He thought with some pity of Dorcas and her craving for elegance. Was she never, no, not once, to eat off china? Always nothing but pewter? Poor girl, she'd not lived too high with Fritzl Jr. But Johnny wished her well. Pewter is a metal plate. I think it's considered a cheaper metal. She's the one who wanted fancy things, but she's gone off with this guy who will never be able to provide it for her. But she loves him. Priscilla Lapham. Ever since Rab had taken her home and left Johnny to eat 6 fried eggs by himself, he had felt differently about Scylla. She had been his best friend through the years he worked at the Laphams, and then for some months she had been a drag on him. He had not bothered much with her. Overnight, that had changed. He was always looking forward to Thursdays and the seed cakes and the half-hour sitting out under the fruit trees with Scylla. And sometimes he would see Miss Lavinia Light. Then Johnny would hold his breath a moment and enjoy the chill that went up his spine. His feelings for Isana had changed, too, and not for the better. It would break Scylla's heart if the little girl did not live up to her lovely face, but Johnny did not like it that last Thursday when he'd been sitting on the back stoop of Scylla with Scylla, and Miss Lavinia had driven up in her smart whiskey with a red coat beside her, and Izana wedged in between. It could not be possible Izana had not seen him, but she had glanced at him and then looked away. Izana is liking this luxurious life, and Johnny represents something she's evidently willing to let go. Johnny rode through the town gates, telling his business to the British sentries there, then went first to report to Paul Revere. A family of Tories in Milton wished to move into Boston and had written Colonel Smith about this move. Although a great many of the Whig families were moving out of town, a great many Tories, frightened by the rough treatment they were getting in the inland towns, were moving in to be under the protection of the British troops. Then, as he had been thinking about the Laphams all the way over from Roxbury, Johnny decided to stop in and see them. He'd not been in the house once since Mrs. Lapham and Mr. Tweedy had been so ready to cast him off for the sake of Mr. Light's patronage. The squeak pig was alone in the shop. He had not so much as one boy to help him with the fires or to sweep his shop. He liked to work alone. Johnny saw that he was mending the silver hilt of a British officer's sword. "What are you doing here?" he muttered crossly at Johnny. Johnny took off his spurs and showed the silversmith a broken rowel. "I want you to fix that one for me this afternoon, Mr. Silversmith." "Yes, sir, yes, indeed." Once Johnny was a patron, the past was forgiven him. "If you'll take a chair, it shall all be mended in 15 minutes. Johnny couldn't help it. He said proudly, "In 10 minutes, Mr. Silversmith." "In 10 minutes, sir?" "Oh, Johnny, don't be quite so cocky again." He walked into the kitchen. There was nobody about, but he could smell bread rising. He looked at the birth and death room. It was once more used for storage. It seemed strange beyond belief that he'd ever lain so long in the room. And in a way he had died in that room. At least something had happened, and the bright side, and the bright little silversmith's apprentice was no more. He stood here again at the threshold, but now he was somebody else. Then he went outside to the little backyard with the coal house, the privy, and the old willow. Underneath the willow sat a British sergeant of Marines with Madge Lapham in his arms. "Oh, Madge is getting on with the British. Interesting." He had rather guessed the Laphams would side with the Tories, but this was fraternizing with the troops at a great rate. Jeez, falling for a British guy. The sergeant was not half as big as Madge, but he was holding her in his lap. It is hard to hold even a small child very long in such a position. Johnny thought the sergeant must be very tough. So she's kind of big, but this guy's smaller, but he's got her sitting in his lap. Okay. They heard his feet and both looked up at him. Johnny laughed, as did the sergeant and Madge. She said, "Just so it isn't Mother," and she twisted and yearned down into her small lover's eyes. The bigger they come, thought Johnny, the harder they fall. Madge certainly likes that sergeant. "Sergeant dear," she said, "I'd like to make you acquainted with an old friend of the family. But Johnny, how you've grown! I don't know whether to introduce you as Johnny or Mr. Tremain." Johnny had grown. Much of the last year had been spent out of doors on horseback, and now he was always out in the sun and wind. "Just Johnny." "Sergeant Gale, dear, this is Johnny Tremain." They both agreed that they were glad to meet. Gale, whose legs must have been badly cramped, picked up Madge as though she were a pet cat and set her down beside him. The little man must be prodigiously strong, thought Johnny, and he liked his ugly, lined face. He looked just about as tough as they come, even in the Marines. Madge, whom he had always liked the least of the Lapham girls, was rosy, glowing, and beaming. He had always heard that love was a wonderful thing. If it could make Madge Lapham so pleasant, he was ready to agree. "Sit down, Johnny, and tell us about yourself." "There's not much to say. I'm making out. Isn't Izana in luck? Taken right into the family like a little sister." "Like a pet poodle dog," Johnny said firmly. "My, you haven't changed much. You always were sort of jumping on other people." "I still jump. How's Mrs. L?" "Don't mention her," said Sergeant Gale. "Ma says I've got to marry Mr. Tweedy. He doesn't want to, and I don't want to. Oh, Johnny, you're too young to understand, and I guess Ma's so old she's forgotten. I can't marry Mr. Tweedy. Not since I met Sergeant Gale." "I'll say not," said the Marine. "Madge, in case you've been wondering, Madge, in case you've been wondering, is going to marry me. Aren't you, you toothsome, plump suet pudding? He calls her a toothsome, plump suet pudding. Yeah, suet is made out of fat. I mean, some of you use in cooking, but he's just being honest, I guess, and they get along okay that way. The skinny little red rascal evidently liked his ladies plump. Johnny went back to the shop and Mr. Tweedy for his work. Paid Mr. Tweedy for his work and buckled on his spurs. He'd enjoyed his visit to the Laphams. Mr. Tweedy had bowed to him, called him sir, and rubbed his hands in gratitude for even this small favor. Madge, so pleasant, and the smell of Ma's good bread rising. Goblin, tied to the head of the wharf, was pawing, turning toward him and nickering. As he settled himself in the saddle and the horse moved off from Fish Street, he thought it had been a nice visit, but he would not go again. That was all over. This is past. Mrs. Bessie, that monstrous fine woman who cooked for the lights, always had an eye out Thursday afternoons for Johnny, and she usually could manage that Scylla was free then, for she was housekeeper as well as cook. This Thursday, as Johnny drew up, she shook her head. You come in, Johnny, but I guess today you have to. Pardon me. You come in, Johnny, but I guess today you'll have to put up with just me. Your little sweetheart, Johnny's stomach turned over, will be needed in the parlor. We've got 9 or 10 of those British officers in there, and Miss Lavinia wants to put on a good show for them. Johnny had often noticed before how disrespectfully Mrs. Bessie spoke of Lavinia, and she was always telling Scylla that she needn't jump so fast when the bell rang for her. Let her blow her own nose for once, she'd say. Johnny knew that it was no good omen that the old woman had no loyalty toward her mistress, whom he had known since her motherless infancy. In his heart, he knew there was something unlikable about Lavinia Light. Mrs. Bessie knew what it was, and Scylla now knew, but she wouldn't tell him. Now when she wanted to talk about Miss Light, she would veil her eyes and talk about and look at him from out of the corners and say nothing. But he knew, Scylla knew. All they in the parlor are fixing up to go to a ball at the Province House General Gage is giving tonight. Masquerade. Miss Lavinia is going like a black queen of spades, and all her special admirers are going to as kings or knaves or jokers out of the pack. Izana's going too. Izana? Yep, where Miss goes these days, that child goes too. Izzy, no one had ever before called the little girl this, goes dressed as a 2-spot, holding up Miss Lavinia's train. Scylla shot into the kitchen, looking bright and excited. Johnny, I thought you might be here. They're trying to make a scepter for the Queen of Spades out of tin. I told them you could do it. Miss Lavinia said, show him in. My gosh, the guy, they'd been in court, and he had challenged her father in public, and now she's inviting him in. Whoa, that's a surprise, people. That is really a surprise. The elegant dove gray, lavender, and yellow drawing room was in what Mrs. Lapham would call a state, meaning it's all messed up. Okay, it's in a state. The officers seemed to have counted on their ladies' help with their costumes, but they also brought with them a military tailor who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, stitching at black and yellow striped jerkin for a knave. Miss Lavinia looked half in and half out of her costume as Queen of Spades. For a moment, Johnny was confused. It was not because she'd had less clothing on than he was accustomed to, but because she was so beautiful. He'd never seen her so happy, so animated before. She was laughing hilariously as she attempted to fasten 2 flat surfaces of cardboard painted with 2 spots onto Izana. But Izana had on nothing but her undershift, her little pink legs bare to the middle thigh. Ma would die if she saw her daughter like this. Johnny Johnny did not care about that, but he could not bear to think of how poor old Mr. Lapham turning over in his grave, because he was so devoutly religious, and this was just not appropriate. Not enough clothes on. Johnny paid no attention to the hilarious Miss Light. He went up to Izana. Look here, girl, you go upstairs and you put some clothes on. Izana stared at him, her beautiful soft brown eyes so blank she looked almost blind. You know your grandpa's just about flopping over and over in his grave. You weren't brought up to act like this. Whoa, he's pretty direct. Izana said, I'm too young to be lascivious. She was evidently repeating what she had heard some adult say. Johnny slapped her, not for himself, but for her grandpa. She went down in a heap, upended over a pile of finery brought down from the attic. While standing up, it was possible she did not have on quite enough clothes for mixed company, but upended, she did not look to have on any. She didn't look to have on any. Then everyone began to laugh. Lavinia was wiping her eyes. Lieutenant Stranger, for it was he who picked the child up, was reduced to painful gasps. Wasn't Stranger the guy that wanted to buy the horse? I think he was. Oh, oh, oh. There was a major in a corner who was vowing he was going to die. Only the military tailor never lifted his eyes, but went on with his stitching. So they all think it's funny. Oh, Johnny, Miss Lavinia managed at last, for the first time calling him by name. Will you come to the ball and slap all the ladies you think are underdressed? Oh, la, I've burst a stay string. Give me Scylla, fetch. Ha! Okay, they think it's all funny. Scylla evidently knew what would be wanted. She came running with smelling salts, but she got it too close to her mistress's nose. Miss Lavinia was gagging. Oh, you stupid, stupid girl. You have killed me. There, take it away. So she's not very nice to Scylla. Izana ran up and hid her flushed face in Miss Lavinia's lap. She was half frightened at the attention she had been receiving and half squirming with delight at being the center of so many eyes. As Miss Lavinia was scolding one sister for a clumsy servant, she was fondling the flying soft yellow hair of the other. So Lavinia just is based on looks. If you just got beautiful hair like Izana does, you can get away with anything. Suddenly Johnny saw red. He hated Miss Lavinia and the giggling officers and Izana. He had already guessed that the two sisters were treated very differently, but he had not before actually seen the situation with his own two eyes. Scylla had backed out of the picture, standing aside, ready to serve if called upon, or ready to be of no more importance than a piece of furniture if not spoken to. So Johnny went to her. Scylla, he said, don't you stay here any more. I don't want you to. These people are nothing, just a pack of playing cards. Tear them up and get out. And that goes for the whole collection of them. Miss Lavinia and Izzy, too. Miss Light had regained her composure. I will not have Izana called Izzy by my servants. I'm not your servant. If she acts like an Izzy, then she gets called Izzy. But as I was saying, Scylla, so everybody's hearing this conversation. It's not spoken privately. I will not have my servants intruding their personal affairs into my drawing room. Priscilla, if you are not satisfied here, I can arrange for your return to your mother, but you are not ever to bring in street boys, horse boys, riffraff. You told me to fetch him in. I did not tell you to fetch him in. Yes, you did. I said a clever metal worker, and you came back with this boy, this saucebox, who couldn't do the work anyway because, ooh, she's going to talk about his hand. Ooh. He couldn't do the work because Johnny waited grimly for her to finish her sentence. If she dared say what was on her mind, because he had a crippled hand, he was going to over and take her by the long throat and shake her, even if she did look pretty well defended by His Majesty's forces, all these soldiers around. His eyes wavered, and she did not finish her sentence because she knew if she talked about his hand, that was going too far. That was really a personal insult. Now, Scylla, I want you to go to your room and lie down. You are too tired. If you had not been, you would never have been so impudent as to contradict me. Yes, Miss Light. And you, she turned to Johnny, get back to the gutter or wherever boys like you keep themselves. Yes, Miss Light, he said, mimicking Scylla. Mrs. Bessie said nothing, but she evidently knew what had been going on in the drawing room. There, Johnny, she says mildly, you sit. That is not real. This is not real tea. But I put, but I put some mint of brandy, put a mite of brandy in it, and it's good and hot. Oh, this is not real. Yeah, this is not real tea. But I put a mite of brandy in it, and it's good and hot. Miss Lavinia is just about making a monkey out of Izana, he said at last. She's treating Izana like she's a pet, okay? Nobody can make a monkey out of anybody who isn't a monkey to start with. Is Scylla happy here? Oh, happy enough. What do you expect? She knows she's lost Izana. At first she used to cry, but now she accepts it. It's exciting for her, and there's always a flurry of and goings-on. The ball tonight, and next week we move out to Milton for the rest of the summer. We won't stay. We won't stay long. Why? Because the Sons of Liberty get there. There are out to get Mr. Light. That's why they haven't yet been rough with the Tories out there. Hope to tempt him to move out, same as usual. They're going to get him and tar and feather him. They're going to ride Miss Lavinia out of town on a rail. They're going to smash his great country house down once he's inside. But the girls, won't they get hurt? I'll be there. It's my secret, so I suppose I can tell you. But I'd take it kindly if you keep your mouth. If you keep your mouth shut. If there were daughters of liberty, I'd be one. You ask Sam Adams about me. I've been helping him secretly for years. The cook has been supporting these guys. Oh, wow. Even though the Lights are strongly pro-British. Well, he kind of rides the fence, but he's generally pro-British. Johnny taking it for granted that an old servant in a Tory house would also be a Tory. They usually were. He looked at Mrs. Bessie, with admiration. The Lights will stay in Milton about a month, she whispered. You mark my words. So she is on the side of the Paul Revere and Sam Adams and all those. That's interesting, people. This is interesting. Okay, chapter 8. I'm going to go on for about another 10 minutes and we'll stop, okay? Oh, pardon me. A world to come. It was by chance Johnny saw the Lights Ruby coach trundling down Orange Street, heading for Milton and a little country air. The bright sun glittered on the gold eye rising on the coach door, on the black sheen of the strong horses. So that's their crest, that rising sun with the eye. He half wanted to stop the coach. Don't you go to Milton, Miss Light. They are lying in wait for you out there. He could not bear to think of her tossed about by rough men, ridden on a rail. He could not see her profile through the window. Scylla sat facing her Izana as befitted her higher station in the household. Scylla sat facing her. Izana, as befitting her higher station in the household, sat next to Miss Light. Only Izana was staring about, observing the lower classes milling about in the street. She looked straight at Johnny as she sat, and he at her. Nothing gave any sign of recognition. So they're just kind of ignoring each other. Boy, you guys, I'm sorry, I'm pretty tired. By the way, it takes a while to download this stuff, so it doesn't really matter that you know that, but I get a whole lot more done, but the downloading takes a little while. It was not by chance that Johnny next saw that Ruby. It was not by chance Johnny next saw that Ruby coach. Late in August, word was spread throughout Boston that Merchant Light had got it and was going to get it out in Milton. If driven from their country house, there was but one safe refuge for them, behind the British lines in Boston. So, toward evening, Johnny began to hang about the gate. Okay, don't go to Milton, Miss Light. They're lying in wait for you there. So, let me back up. Izana was staring about her. She looked at Johnny, he at her. Izana ignores him. Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it. It was not by chance Johnny next saw that Ruby coach. He saw them going out. Late in the summer, word was spread through Boston that Merchant Light had got it and was going to get it out of Milton. If driven from their country house, there was but one safe refuge for them, behind the British lines in Boston. So Johnny's been watching for this coach. Toward evening, Johnny began to hang about the gate. The farm carts carrying food and fuel to Boston were still coming in over the mud flats connecting the town with the mainland. The British guard at the gate, nearly 200 men, were kept stationed there night and day, let pass. But when night really fell, the gates were closed and most of the soldiers returned to the barracks. There were a few sentries on duty and a handful of men, with a corporal in the guardhouse. Johnny settled down to wait. He'd been dozing, but woke quickly, hearing the sentries yell and the corporal commanding the gates to be opened. Then, coming closer through the still summer night, the clatter of hoofs, the rumble of coach, was a sickening, hair-raising howl, the howling of a human wolf pack. A human wolf pack. The corporal had not had time to get his tunic on, but he recognized the situation. Another of His Majesty's loyal supporters fleeing to Boston with a mob at its heels. So people are against the pro-Boston people, and they're chasing them down. Ugh. Torches only, he was crying to his men. No muskets. Death to any man who fires. The unarmed soldiers ran out to meet the coach with gear. Unarmed soldiers ran out to meet the coach with great flaring torches in their hands. The mob already had stopped and was drifting back from whence it came. Through the canopy of shaking orange light and through the smell of burning pitch black horses, whitened with lather and dragging a heavy ruby coach, slowly crawled to the safety of the gates. The gates shut behind them. The coach seemed disabled. The horses were almost spent. A torch flared up from the coachman's face. It was twisted with fear. Mr. Light, yourself, sir, the young corporal was saying as he opened the door of the coach. Let me assist you, sir. You've lost a wheel off your coach. Please to come into the guardhouse while you wait for another vehicle. Mr. Light, helped by the corporal, but even more by Miss Lavinia, did crawl from the coach. He tried to smile, but his lips drew back from the yawn with long yellow teeth. Johnny had seen the identical expression on the face of a dead woodchuck. He was a desperately sick man. Lavinia's face shone with no fear, only concern over her father's condition. Now she was telling the corporal that a doctor must be fetched, and she wanted Dr. Warren. I know he's a rebel, but do get him for me. He's the best doctor we have in town, and Papa must have the best. So Dr. Warren, who previously had wanted to talk to Johnny about his hand, but Johnny didn't want to talk about it, he is known as the best doctor, so that's who Lavinia wants, even though he's a rebel. Her father safely inside the guardhouse, Miss Lavinia came into the street a moment, gazing blankly at the disabled coach, and as the men carrying from it, and at the men carrying from it into the guardhouse such of their most precious possessions that they had time to rescue from Milton. For the first time Johnny saw Scylla. She had been sitting on the box with the coachman. Now she went to Miss Light. Somehow, he said, the silver got left behind. The silver? Max Light did not seem to be able to take in anything but her father's sickness. I'm going to pause. No. The silver, Miss Light did not seem to be able to take in anything but her father's sickness. You told me to pick it up, but just as I had begun, we heard the mob coming, and then Miss Light had a fit. Oh, yes, I remember. All that silver. Well, she was standing in the street watching for the sight of Dr. Warren's chase. Isana, very good and quiet, was snuggled close to her hand in that of her patroness. Oh, never mind, child, she said with all absent-minded kindness. At least we're all safe. If only Papa is well, and I'm going back to Milton. Miss, do you get that silver before the riffraff get it? Is Johnny talking to her? He's talking to her? Dr. Warren's chase was drawing up. Most likely they have it already. Dr. Warren's chase was drawing up beside the guardhouse. He was getting out. Miss Lavinia had no more thought of her silver. Johnny went up to Scylla. Look, Scylla, he said, I'm here. It was so mixed up at the end. The girl seemed to be trying to explain her error more to herself than to Johnny. Mrs. Light turned purple and fell. The mob was getting closer. It came earlier than Mrs. Bessie warned us. Mrs. Bessie? Yes, she found out some way in the village. Johnny liked the old woman all the better that in the end she'd been unable to see a considerate master whom she'd served for 30 years, a young woman with whom she'd taken care of since she was a baby, humiliated, tossed about, torn by a mob. Sam Adams might respect her less for this weakness. Johnny respected her the more. So even though Mrs. Bessie is for the rebels, she cannot just let her people get hurt, the people she works for. She's got loyalty to them, and Johnny respects that. Johnny, I've got to get back to Milton. I'm going to save that silver. It was my fault. But Miss Lavinia didn't seem to care. She didn't scold you. If she had, I wouldn't go. She thinks it has been stolen already. No, after smashing the gates and some windows, the mob left the house to chase us. We didn't dare leave by the front drive. We started out through the haying fields, but they heard us and caught up with us, getting away all right, getting away all right until just on the neck, a wheel came off of the coach. It was terrible. I've got to go back though, and now I'll go with you. So Scylla wants to go back to get the silver, okay? Because she felt like it's her fault that it didn't get picked up. I'll go with you, but looks like we'll need a horse and a chaise. It's 7 miles. Dr. Warren was standing on the guardhouse steps, telling Miss Light that her father must be allowed to finish the night out on the bed, and soldiers to make up for it. Soldiers made up for him. He was not to be moved, and never again must he be so upset over anything. From now on, as long as he lived, and as she loved him, he was never to be angered or worried. The handsome girl was nodding, promising these things. The handsome girl was nodding, promising these impossible things. She went back to her father, still clutching Isana by the hand, and Johnny went to the doctor. Obviously, Dr. Orman did not want to lend his horse and chaise. He did not care what happened to the light silver, but he was a generous man. He let Johnny have his rig and also wrote him a pass, which would prevent any molestation from the Whig mobs, and told Scylla to get a similar pass from the British soldiers. Then they would be safe from either side. So at last the gates once more swung open swung slowly, heavily in. Beyond was darkness and a dreary waste of land and sea. The doctor's little rabbit cage, I'm sorry, I'm losing it. The doctor's little rabbit-eared mare flung herself forward. It would not take such a fast pace or long to get to Milton. So his horse traveled really fast. I'm sorry, I found that one a little bit confusing as to who's talking to who. Okay, but I definitely Scylla needs to get back. I'm going to shut this off. We'll talk to you guys later.